Okay, now we are entering the panel discussion. We are inviting Dr. Joshua Apgar, Ms. Sridevi Challa, Dr. Lucy Fang, Dr. Pravin Jadhav, Dr. Rajan Jog, Mr. Senthil Kumar, Dr. Devin Pastoor, and Dr. Andrew Rowe. Yeah. I want to introduce the panel I haven't introduced yet. So, Mr. Sridevi Challa is the lead for continuous performance improvement at the Sandoz Development Center. He drives the strategic initiative to evaluate operational efficiency and lead the transformation efforts aligned with the evolving need of Sandoz. Dr. Andrew Rowe is current Associate Director for Science and Communication in Office of Pharmaceutical Quality Assessment in OPQ. Dr. Rowe is involved in the development of several important FDA initiatives, and he is a principal architecture of a knowledge-aided assessment and structured application, CASA. Welcome all the panelists. Actually, I also want to give a special thanks to Dr. James Clark. Is he here? Can you stand up? Oh yeah, you're here. Yeah, I want to, Dr. Clark is not a speaker or panelist, but he made a special contribution, significant contribution for organizing and coordinating for this session, starting from a few months ago. Thank you so much. All right, then.
I think Dr. Challa is joining online.
Yeah, yes, Dr. Challa and Senthil are online with us. Yes. Okay. So through the presentation, I already see the passion from the speakers, especially for the last few presentations. Time seems absolutely not enough, so we can utilize this time to let everybody ask questions and let the panelists share their thoughts. So for whatever they don't have time to share during the presentation. I already see someone sitting in the stage, please.
From Epivax, and I'm really so pleased to be here today and wanted to thank the organizers for making this event happen, because we've heard some great talks, including in this session. And I really appreciate especially the last talk about how we should be fearless in our adaptation of AI, but also coordinated across the enterprise. That's certainly something that we need to work on, all of us. And I think the last speaker encouraged us to think about that, especially at Epivax. We use AI tools all the time, but coordination, maybe not so much between individuals. So I think that's one comment I wanted to make. And I wanted to ask what are the validation approaches that would be recommended by the panel? For example, we've heard today about some approaches to immunogenicity, which is my area of interest. And I hear, words being used like humanness, but how do we assess whether the AI tool really evaluates humanness correctly? Is there a validation that the regulators would like to see if that's one of the features of the AI tool? How would you ask for validation, especially when the methods are not published? So in many cases, we have publications that describe the methodology, but in a lot of cases, if these tools are developed internally, you may not actually get the publication. What kind of validation do the regulators like to see when they're seeing, say, an ANDA application?
All right, thank you for the question. I guess.
So we actually have a breakout session right after this. We will talk about a lot of issues, the question you just asked. I would suggest we continue our discussion in that breakout session.
Is there any insight anybody want to share? Any question?
I would say in terms of at least, again, I don't know the regulatory expectation, but I guess your question kind of comes into this, how do I know what is generated by machines is good enough, or is it accurate enough? And it's mostly in the, I would say, realm of Gen AI, I will speak. At the end, though, the owner is us, human beings. So when you are submitting, you own it. The methods we have been using, especially on the softwares that we have, is basically a battery of SME-driven tests that we have developed over the years. So whether you're kind of taking software in from someone or building one, that may be essential. But it's also, I think, again, as a former reviewer, I would say context of use matters. What you're going to do with that information matters. So build battery that is appropriate for that context of use, because you don't want to be just keep testing and testing all. I think they say in models, but you can say in for Gen AI model also, all models are wrong. Some are useful. At the end, the objective, your KPI, that's what I talked about. KPIs have to be clear. What are you trying to do? Let's say you want to save 50% of the time, 50% time on, let's say, 80% of your applications. That's how I would measure success, rather than trying to say, if you put your saying this can do no mistake, I would argue then you probably will not rely on humans either, because we'll make mistakes too. So how are you accepting human created output but holding machines at a higher standard that nobody can meet? Context of use may be useful.
I can, is this on? Yep. Okay, awesome. I can speak a little bit more towards some of the other kind of things, especially around the implementation of validation. One of the nice things that we are able to take advantage of kind of think collectively is that our pharma in general moves, even with the rapid pace of AI, still a lot slower and at a smaller scale than a lot of other industries. And so one of the things that we can do when it comes to generative AI is keep a strong pulse on what is coming out as standards for these organizations that are dealing with a velocity and volume of data that is orders of magnitude larger than ours. And what are the tools and frameworks that they're employing, where we don't really want to be on the cutting edge. We want to see, like, what are the things that are staying stable. So for example, when it comes to generative AI testing, there is this concept of literal evaluation. And it's kind of a little bit mind warping, where you're going to use a large language model to evaluate the output of a large language model. And so on the surface, you can make that statement and someone can say, well, how does that work? But the nice thing is this has been a problem that is being solved at a ginormous scale, and there's some fantastic like open source tools as well as vendor products that are available that help kind of guide you in the direction of what is successful. And so, if you're actually doing generative AI stuff, there's like one framework out of the UK government called Inspect that they're using across corpuses of, billions of documents and whatnot to figure out how do you ask questions and synthesize information and whatnot. So my first statement is that we can grab perspective from other industries. The next statement kind of echoes my talk of like, you must understand how some of these work. Like, I think one of the things that seems to startle people when they look into like what a large language model can do is like a large language model has no memory. It has a very narrow bit of information that something goes in and something comes out. Any construct of memory, of compute, of processing information that can't fit in this very narrow window is an artifact of the software that surrounds it. And so when we talk about like synthesizing 70 million documents, like you're going to get a couple 100,000 at most tokens or kind of words of information that can go into the large language model at one time. If you can start to appreciate some of those limitations, the assessment frameworks should be built around understanding where does like the large language model operate, where is your information source being distilled? How is it being distilled? And importantly, appreciating how these things are changing and evolving over time. That context window that I mentioned a year ago was like a quarter of what it is now, and it is growing. And so what we see is that we actually see entire vendor products literally getting like obviated overnight because they spend an enormous amount of time building very sophisticated technology around synthesis, where the next generation of models can just say like, I can take 10 times more information, just give it to me. All of your hard-earned technological work is now obviated. What it means for us adapting those tools means that the next version of that product might need a very different assessment. And so figuring out where the true AI pieces are, where the software pieces are, and how they kind of connect together can help drive where and how you're kind of making those overarching assessments.
Okay, I think the response is satisfactory. Okay, let's move on. Please.
Hey, thank you. My name's Ian Howson. We've talked quite a lot today about how you get yourself ready for AI tools, and a lot of the talk has been about structuring data, metadata tagging, and all of that sort of stuff. So this is maybe a contentious question. What if I just did that? You know, as a stepping stone on the way to then being able to use it in my large language models and writing submissions. But how far do you get by just structuring your data properly in the first place? You know, from where you are now, if you're starting out.
Okay, thanks for the question. I think it's about the AI-driven writing. Any want to share the?
Yeah, so at OGD, we have, as I showed in my presentation, the success is 232 ANDAs that were successfully reviewed using the structured platform that we have implemented since 2022. So the goal was, as I mentioned in my presentation, was to convert that narrative review-based template to a structured template. So that would help us evaluate and understand the consistency perspective, that is number one, but also when we have to look at cross applications and understand the review issue or any deficiencies that were previously issued for a set of dosage form, then we can accordingly evaluate for that particular drug product. So within 3 years, I would say we have successfully implemented the structured review format within OGD, and we are constantly working on more such successes throughout different programs. So, thank you.
Yeah, I'm trying to understand the question. You were talking about structuring data with AI. Is that was the question? I wasn't very clear.
No, it was, so we've talked quite a lot about if I'm going to be using large language models to prepare documents and regulatory submissions. A lot of what we need to do is to go back to our existing data and structure it in the correct format to make sure that it's ready, it's got its correct metadata tagging, that we can maybe search it all properly in the first place. And I was actually, it just struck me that actually maybe that in terms of writing regulatory submissions and making it a lot simpler, and maybe it's heresy in this audience, but actually does that get us 70% of where we're trying to get to? Does that actually take us a really long way in the first place? And maybe act as a really good intermediate sort of stepping stone. I mean, there's certainly good scientific practice obviously buried in there, but we all know we have different organizations. If you work in large companies, different parts of the organization structure data differently. Your tables all look different. Certainly talking about that at lunch time. So does that provide a bit more context, or am I making it worse?
So I can give you some little bit of context of structuring data that we're doing in FDA. And we're exploring this. So basically, I'm the lead of the CASA initiative. And what does the CASA initiative do? It's going to try to do with consistency. And there's two parts of it. There's the application submission part, but then there's the evaluation part. And what we have been trying to do is to make the evaluation part very consistent. Like we have consistent risk, it calculates the risk assessment using the algorithms. It does the mitigation part, in a structured manner, so we provide consistency for our reviews and our applications. And it's already being deployed across 40% of the ANDAs, across all disciplines. But then with this release that we're having 5.0, it's going to be across basically more than 95% of ANDAs, of this consistency of the assessment across all the disciplines, whether it's drug product, micro, manufacturing. But we did identify one gap, and this is related to the structuring data that you alluded to. So when we have, remember, there's two parts. There's the application submission, and then there's the specifications, the manufacturing controls, and so forth, in process controls, sterility assurance process parameters. That's one part, but then there's the evaluation. Evaluation, we can make it structured, but the problem we're having is that a lot of these applicants, they're submitting all these applications in different formats. They could have a specification table one format, another specification in a different format. And one of the underlying limitations of CASA, we have the reviewers, transcribe that information, manually into the application. But what we have found, and we're exploring this, it's only exploration, but we have found that these large language models are quite good at transforming the unstructured data that you're submitting in those applications to the structured format that we would ingest into the CASA platform. So this would, and actually that's one of the nice things about it. There's a lot of this menial work that, we hire super smart people, but we have them do some of this menial work to transcribe this unstructured data into the structured data, the CASA format. So there's a lot of, potential for it to eliminate this sort of, this labor intensive work, ingested into the CASA thing. So people can really focus on, really high level thinking as opposed to doing these very, very arduous and tasks that, the labor intensive, tasks that don't require a lot of high level. People can focus on those things. So we see that is to be a big advantage.
Yeah, I would add to that, in a 10-minute presentation, you can only say so much. This is one of my favorite topics. Everybody wants to talk about AI. Nobody wants to talk about data. If you want to build a good AI system, want to make a good call it more accurate, goes to previous question about accuracy. Outputs out of it, there is no substitute to good data. There's no substitute. You can, to your point, if I am getting a submission that has all these dates and everything, or I'm getting a paper that has all the dates, I would look at AI and say, can I digitize it? Can I structure it? But I wouldn't mind going back asking, can you give me in a structured format? Because that's the use of AI. It's kind of a, and we do that, by the way. It's more of, because I must use it. But then if the data are given and say, now give me interpretation of that. What does that mean? So for example, one of the work we do is predict kind of filing timelines and risks and things like that. So we go to FDA reviews and there are these dates, FDA receive date and the mid-cycle date and all that. To his point, AI is pretty good in digitizing that. It makes mistakes. It thinks this date is that is that, because that's kind of how the documents are also created. So then we have a large group. So our actually data group outnumbers the engineering group. Just people who are looking after the data and kind of just call it the whole data aggregation pipeline that we have. That's actually a very good point you mentioned, because that's something needs to be taken seriously. If you have internal documents, if there are like 17 ways your organization does the same work, you're going to need that much training data to be able to automate that process. Maybe first ask if there should be a little bit of a normalization. Can I get from these 17 ways of doing the same work to 1 or 2 ways? So AI for the sake of AI, sure. If you cannot get it, sure. But first question always should be asked, could I get my data in a much better way than that is today? And that starts with change management and organizational process change. But I would definitely say to the audience, this data is an important component of building good AI systems.
Yeah, I also want to add to this data access part. I think the success of AI is really determined on the access to a diverse and large scale of data, as Dr. Robert Leinberg talked about. FDA's current focus on the data infrastructure. And for our in-house effort, we use AI really to combine the multimodal data. For example, when we build the PK data warehouse, we use AI to really digest those unstructured data and extract those metadata and input into our data warehouse to make it executable. So I really echo the importance of the access to data.
Okay, I think two gentlemen already standing too long. So,
So I'll go first. So when it's more regulatory submission, when people talking about agentic AI, right? Multi-agentic or single agent AI. So the problem is that when they offer lots of convenience, productivity in the same time, when you give the agent the same task, it gives you a slightly different answer every time. So the consistency could be potentially an issue, especially when you are doing a model, like a modeling approach every time. Even sometimes it may give you a different model, a final model at the end. So in that regard, if for industry submission, you need a model or data construction traceability, right? In that regard, what's your view on potential solutions on handling the variations every time when you ask an agent to do something, especially, you want a sure answer or it's a model or data construction. So what's the potential solutions in your opinion?
Yeah, thanks, Liao. So the question is about the consistency and the variation of the outcome from the AI. Anybody want?
Yeah, no, I mean, I think you really hit on it. I think, traceability, is kind of the key question, right? Because ultimately you are going to have to validate the results, particularly key results, which means being able to go through and understand the logic. And I think that's kind of where, we're sort of trying to break these more complicated tasks into smaller pieces. And then I didn't really show it, but at each one of those, you get sort of a record of the query result that gets fed into the next stage. And so you can kind of look to see where each piece came from and follow it through. I think the other is, kind of coming back to the earlier question, I think ultimately we are really sort of using this to sort of structure the data, in a better way, in a more understandable way. And I think to some extent, the purpose of these is almost sort of really driving better human behaviors rather than sort of better machine behaviors, and that we're constructing these databases and these, in our case, these graphs of information. And it's all information that someone could put in along the way, and they could apply the appropriate tags as they're into the data. It just doesn't happen. And so at some level, what we're trying to do is sort of automate the sort of micro behaviors of someone to get all these things in the system, such that when you do that now big compile at the end to generate the document, it's relying on, a lot of individual pieces that have each been like very thoroughly reviewed and validated, rather than trying to start from the assembled document and then work your way backwards, because at that point the context has been lost, and it's almost impossible to do at that stage. So it's really kind of working your way from the micro, to the macro, rather than try to go the other way around.
So with respect to the non-determinism, I have kind of a two-part commentary on that. I think one piece is that there is a pretty active body of research right now around getting deterministic outputs, right? You can already control things at a technical level, like temperature, around basically how different is each time the LLMs, how different the response might be. And there is some research that is literally showing, depending on how you set up your model, very deep way, you can get a much more deterministic result. So if that's a thing that matters to you, there is probably going to be some answers coming down the pipe. But I will fundamentally challenge that statement and say that that should not be an objective. Your objective is to say, I want a fast CSR, and it must be identical every single time. You're putting a bar that we would never ask if you had a human reviewer say, write this CSR, throw it away, and then write it word for word identically the next time you did this. What we need to think about is, what are we communicating? What are the pieces of data that must be correct? And what are the decisions that are being guided through here, and make sure those are consistent? And that is a non-trivial challenge. This is what I mentioned when I said like those evaluation frameworks help build a governing framework on how you can test these non-deterministic outputs to determine is the result of the output still consistent with what you're looking for without being identical. But if anyone is trying to say, I think the only way I could adopt this AI is it must be able to give me consistent, identical results, like, please don't try to achieve that objective. Step back and say, what is good enough to be consistent, to be able to kind of take that answer and run with it.
Yeah, I mean, again, fundamentally, to Devin's point, the design as well as infrastructure doesn't lend itself to, say, the deterministic results. When you put question in ChatGPT, you are competing against millions of people who are using the same compute resource, is trying to do kind of, and you're also expecting answers faster. So fundamentally, it is that. So the question, I think, kind of reiterate his point is, you got to ask how wrong is it, and am I willing to accept it? That's the same question you would be asking if you gave your model to two different people. They'll come up with two different answers. We actually celebrate that. We say, oh, that's a curiosity. You thought of something different. And I think with agent, we think, oh, it's wrong. Maybe not, but yes, that goes to that AI fixer, what I talked about. So I think we'll need to be more of AI fixers, Dr. Zhao. It's kind of, how wrong is it? And can I live with kind of the variations it comes up with?
And I see, Sridevi, you opened the mic. You want to share something? Oh, Senthil.
Mic
Okay.
drop.
Oh, probably not. Okay, then let's move on.
So I might just piggyback on that particular question about the consistency, but more than consistency, we have heard the word hallucination. Is something been done about that, and how you as a AI companies are handling that particularly? And then I have two other questions for the speakers. So if you want to just quickly touch base on the hallucination part of it.
The hallucination thing has actually been talked about. Both Josh and Pravin talked about it. Like these things that we're talking about, in large part, are in response to the fact that hallucination comes from the fact that these large language models do not have knowledge, right? They are dream machines. They're token prediction engines. And what we know, when we know in terms of what research has shown, is that a couple things emerge. One is that the more context you give the LLM, the more likely is it to go down these kind of divergent neural pathways. And so the more you can provide it a concise question and the right information, the better the chance that you are to get the information you need. So how we're addressing that are things like prompt chaining, or these other distillation techniques where you're saying, instead of going and saying, I'm going to ask you to do all of these things at once, I'm going to ask you to do a whole bunch of things, and then I'm going to synthesize those, and then I'm going to do a whole bit more. So you're reducing the surface area of the information that you need to give it for any one question. And then you're using these sequential approaches to limit how much information you need to flow into the large language model. If you're interested to learn more about these things, read about terms like context rot, where basically if you go past something like 30 or 40,000 tokens, there's a degradation in the quality of your response. There's actually a lot of research that goes into each individual model around like even where in the question data is, about how well it's able to retrieve that and how it hallucinates. And so there's upstream work you can do to get a good final answer. Then you can also complement that with downstream checks and balances around saying, not only are we going to get a response, but we're going to then fact check that response in some way, shape, or form, where this is something where, as much as the large language models are improving, a lot of this is actually vendors providing more and more, we'll call it traditional tool augmentation, to orchestrate these things, to do checks and balances behind the scenes, that it's going to distill that down into a final response that has less hallucinatory artifacts inside of it.
Yeah.
Actually, if I say hallucination was a topic probably 2 years ago, was front and center, because there were limited models out there and their training was backdated. So if you remember, early versions of ChatGPT was trained up to This GPT was trained up to 2019, 2020 or something like that. Ever since then, what has happened is they have figured out how to train quickly. So now the training is much, much recent. Also, there are many methods that have evolved and many models have evolved. So now what we as a vendor, we have to do is right model for right purposes. So Google has some models that are useful, say OpenAI has some models that are useful. So you have to know what the limitations are. You can previously it was like one model, I'm asking question and people ask as simple of a question of how do I make something in my kitchen to some complex world peace question, and it's sort of would hallucinate. And the other thing that has kind of allowed us to do with the tech development that has happened, now we are able to control these hallucinations at multiple levels. Devin talked about temperature. That's more of an engineering thing. There are many other parameters you said. Where the Gen AI world has gone, now we as SME kind of digitize our brain to the engineers and they convert that to system instructions. They teach them, you know this, you can do this, you are allowed to do this, you're not allowed. So there are guardrails you can put, and there are also concept of what is called a safety agent. So now not both softwares, one of the softwares, every answer that comes, that gets through the safety agent. It checks for itself. Now, of course, there could be a little bit of a bias in its own. So a lot of tools have emerged to kind of handle that. Not to say AI doesn't hallucinate, and it will for a long time. I don't think we are getting away from hallucinating. When that's when your process of how are you using checking human in the loop will I think I don't foresee any time soon that component going away. It's somebody who can catch hallucination. That's not going away, but it has drastically gone down in last 2 years. It was a big deal. Like people were posting, 1 + 1 was 0.2 for AI software at the beginning. It's no longer the case.
Thanks.
Yeah,
I have a
so
follow-up.
I'm sorry, given the time, because we only have a few minutes, I would like to leave one opportunity from the virtual audience. I'm sorry. But if you have a question, welcome to talk with SME, after. So Dr. Wang, can you proceed, read one question from the virtual audience?
Sure. So there is one question from the online attendees for Dr. Senthil Kumar. It seems that there was already a lot of modeling done before AI and machine learning became hot. So how is the current integration of AI and machine learning different from the prior modeling approaches? Could you please comment on the improvement in efficiency of using AI or machine learning approaches for the therapeutic protein impurity prediction or mitigation compared to what was done before?
Okay, this is a question from Senthil. So anyone want to touch upon the question?
Yeah.
Yeah, you can speak, please.
Okay. I think if I understood right, the first question is on how different the new AI is compared to the traditional model, right? So if I look into the traditional AI models are mostly like a classification or regression based way to do the AI. What I believe is like when I was talking in my presentation, I was talking about ML model to optimize the peptide synthesis process. So when I talk about it, like when we synthesize peptide, while we have a huge amount of data set, we also have a chemistry in place. So peptides are a sequence of amino acid, and each amino acid is a chemistry. How can I build the AI model on top of it? So now the chemistry of each amino acid is converted to a fingerprint. So now it has become digitally, available to build the deep learning model for each amino acid kind of. So that is how I believe that the new way of AI is helping us to convert even chemistry to a digital, which can also be learned through AI to get informed decisions to take it forward.
To be honest, I have a little bit difficulty to hear what he said. But if anyone have anything to.
She's speaking.
Oh, sorry, Challa. I cannot. We cannot hear you.
No.
Okay. Sorry, I think there's some technical issue here, but actually we're already over the time. But I think everybody can feel the passion on this topic. There's a lot of things we can discuss more after the this session. So let's continue. Then now I will invite Dr. Lucy Fang to give a closing remark for the session 1 and 2.
Let's really thank our excellent speakers and panel members. Okay, so I really want to thank you for the excellent first day exploring AI in the complex generic and new drug development and regulatory assessment. So what are some of our key takeaway from today? So I think from my personal takeaway, the session 1 really provided us essential regulatory frameworks. So from FDA's risk-based credibility assessment to EMA's comprehensive AI work plan, as well as FDA's practical deployment of ELSA across the agency. We also heard Dr. Robert Lineberger's insights on his vision on how AI will transform generic drug development and regulatory assessment. So session 2 brought these frameworks to real-world applications, AI-driven peptide development at Dr. Reddy's, FDA's Gadesa-BE system transforming the bioequivalence review, and industry innovation, mechanistic modeling, and assisting regulatory submission preparation. A lot of really use cases we heard today. And we think, I mean, at least I really heard the clear message. AI is actively transforming drug development and regulatory assessment. So for those of you who participated today virtually, we know we didn't get time to address your question, but I want to ensure you that we are going to summarize the key discussions in a manuscript, like the meeting report. So some of the questions you posted in the chat box, we will make sure to address those questions. And for the next 2 hours, our in-person attendees will participate the 2 breakout sessions with folks case studies. So those breakout sessions will only to our internal attendees. And looking into tomorrow, we will explore the AI supporting drug development and the quantitative medicine, including digital twins, the PBPK modeling, and computational fluid dynamics modeling approaches. So I really want to thank you for your engagement and insightful questions today. I want to welcome you back tomorrow at 8:30 a.m. And this concludes our virtual portion of the day 1 workshop.